So thank you. Let's pray. Coming up on Thanksgiving, so maybe just take a moment of quiet, and if you feel compelled to share one or two things that are blessings that you didn't expect in the last day or week or month. Something.
I learned of some family members that will be able to join us for Thanksgiving, and it is a wonderful surprise, and will be a great blessing to have them with us.
I've just gotten just a few friends have been extremely kind and supportive, and I was really touched by their care and support of me. So it was very nice.
For my family and friends, let's see, and the ability to hear my nieces and nephews laugh. Not losing more hearing.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to take this session. It's really helpful. I feel a lot more at peace with what's happening.
That's a really good answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to my husband who's been watching the kids while I'm here. That's thankful.
That's a gift.
You have no children?
Yeah. 6 and 9.
Think of this gentleman that I met yesterday at the jail, and I was really kind of dreading that because you never know what's going to happen, and the staff there said he's been extraordinarily manipulative with staff and fellow inmates, and so we kind of go in with guard up. But we'll see, planted some seeds, I think. So that's God's grace at work.
Amen.
So in gratitude we pray, our Father, who art in heaven,
Hallowed be thy name.
thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I didn't bring much this time. You have perhaps your text of the ERD, and we're on part 6. So I gave you a handout. Did I give you one here?
Yes, sir.
One.
I have to share with my wife.
That'd be good. So on the one side is this flow chart that I did a number of years ago, explaining in words the principles governing cooperation. It gets kind of messy. And this helped me to sort of see it in a flow chart form, and we'll come back and talk about this in some more detail. And then on the other side is a compilation of things that I have used over the years, and it comes from some documents from the the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. I mentioned the first class, I think, about 2000. There were several arrangements in the United States that were brought to the attention of Rome about some partnerships and arrangements in Catholic hospitals that were problematic. And so the bishops asked for some clarification, and the CDF came out with, Catholic Health Association came out with a series of documents around the principles governing cooperation. The CDF then responded to some of these concerns, and I just distilled the main points. So I use this list when we're talking about collaboration between a Catholic and a not Catholic, other than Catholic organization. What kinds of firewalls need to be in place to ensure that the Catholic partner in this arrangement doesn't compromise its own commitments and values and the ethical and religious directives. Cooperation is about aligning with, well, I shouldn't say aligning, combining with people who might not share all of our moral commitments, values, prohibitions. It is possible to avoid collaboration or cooperation entirely. If one does this, however, you miss opportunities and sometimes miss part of your own responsibility in the world. And this has always been the tension in the church. Do we just sort of look inward as this group that is sort of pure and keeps aloof from the rest of the world, the problematic world? And, or do we go out and be involved and try and evangelize?
Do you guys have a water fountain nearby?
Oh.
Right here. To be a leaven in the world. And that's been a tension throughout the history of the church. We have lots of examples of that in our history. Certainly Pope Francis, and I think really even before the Second Vatican Council, but certainly in the years since, the idea of being a leaven in the world, of being present, evangelizing, the new evangelization that we are sent into the world. And that means that we will at times, like me and this gentleman who insisted he was an ordained minister because he got it online, and he stopped doing crack cocaine but still smokes weed because that's different. He wants to go out and preach if he ever gets out of jail and all these things. Interesting. Interesting. So that's really where this whole idea of cooperation comes in. And it goes back to Aquinas, and even before Aquinas, some of this tradition. And drawing the lines of collaboration and cooperation is what this is about. So what the CDF came up with is, there were 3 arrangements, I'm not going to remember all 3 of them, that were problematic. One was in Arizona, one was in, maybe 2 were in Texas, but it was in the southern United States. So I think I maybe mentioned this example where this hospital said, we don't do abortions here, but there's half that hallway, which is not our building. We don't own it, we don't manage it, but abortions are done there. It's under the same roof, but different setup. Another one was, we don't do sterilizations here, but they built an outpatient center where those things could be done. and referred people there. It's not ours. We built it, we run it, we manage it, but we just say it's not ours. And so those are the things that the CDF said, no, there are boundaries here in terms of what is acceptable cooperation. So this was the firewall checklist that I came up with looking at all of those documents. What can a Catholic party not do in a collaboration? Be managerially responsible for a facility engaged in intrinsically evil acts. For the Catholic tradition, the idea of intrinsic evil means that an action is done that by its very nature is morally wrong. It cannot lead to true human fulfillment. And I was talking with Glenn on the radio today, you know, secular culture also has this idea of intrinsically evil acts. We don't share obviously the same thing, but so racism, to question people's gender identity, the Me Too kind of thing. So there's certain moral outrage around certain things. You can't criticize another person's, can't even question another person's faith or the fact that they have no faith. You can't evangelize because that's offensive to people. So we're in this kind of mishmash world. What the Catholic moral tradition means by intrinsically evil is that there is no circumstance which can ever make this morally acceptable. So we often think in the context of healthcare of things like abortion, sterilization, contraception. Those are kind of the three big reproductive issues. But in the catechism, we'll also find things like child abuse, murder, rape. These are things that no circumstance can ever justify. So the catechism has a broader category than most people associate. They think that the Catholic Church is only interested in these sexual issues, these reproductive issues. That is not true. It's where we get the most ink, but that's not all that we teach. So you can't have a facility that is under Catholic management that does these intrinsically wrong acts. You can't be legally responsible for that. It's known as piercing the corporate veil. You can set up all these little shell companies, but you know that the people who are really running it, in fact, it goes right back up the trail to the same leadership.
So somehow, I mean, this is, like you said, this doesn't, I don't know how this would ever work, but so that the hospital builds a satellite office, and somehow you could literally say that we're not accountable for any of those people over there. Still don't know why'd you build it, but you'd have to really show some clear.
Yeah, let's go down the list. I think it'll become clearer. You cannot adopt the evil intention of the wrongdoer in the arrangement. The idea here is to say, if you didn't do it, we would. That's having the same intention. So it's convenient if you do it instead of us, but we would do it if you didn't. That is not acceptable. Again, to lease space within a Catholic administered facility for the performance of sterilization, contraception, whatever. To benefit financially, even indirectly, by rent or supplies from the performance of these things.
Right.
Furnish supplies. So you can get your contraceptives from our pharmacy, or we'll give you the medical equipment to do abortions. Not acceptable.
I know when I was in Rochester, contraceptives were out of the Methodist pharmacy in that St. Mary's.
That's an example of a firewall.
Yeah.
And we have something similar at St. Cloud Hospital. So there's the Centricare Pharmacy and there's the River Campus Pharmacy. The River Campus Pharmacy does not carry contraceptives.
That's right.
But the Plaza does.
Because it's under Centricare, not St. Cloud Hospital.
Hospital.
That was one of the first things I did as the ethics consultant. So they had this proposal of, we'll just make one leader for all the pharmacies.
Can't do that.
I can't do that.
Because of what you're saying.
Yeah. And so I don't think I made a lot of friends then, but they had to hire 2 people and set up this arrangement.
Right.
Okay.
Centricare can do whatever it wants, but if you're going to involve the hospital, these are the boundaries. Bishop Kinney was here. Back to that. Furnace plan. Set up, sustain, advocate, authorize, approve, or benefit from an institution that is established solely to do these things. Have its staff participate, and we'll come back to what we mean by immediate material cooperation. Appeal to duress. So this was one of the things that was often, duress is pressure, fear of harm by not cooperating, pressure, duress. So the classic example is it's always a 7-Eleven. You're a clerk in the 7-Eleven, guy comes in with a gun, grabs child, holds gun to child's head and says, if you don't open that safe, I will kill this child. So, and unfortunately this is not a purely fanciful scenario. And
Hostages.
so the clerk can open the safe. He is immediately cooperating with the wrongdoing, but against his will. And the duress is the harm that he fears for this innocent party, or even his own life. That would justify as duress. What was happening in healthcare was the idea that, well, there's financial duress. So if we don't start this little clinic or offer sterilization or contraception, people will go somewhere else, and then we'll lose our OBGYN department, and eventually our hospital will disappear. Somebody else will open a hospital as competition, and so we feel this financial pressure on our institution, and therefore we'll do this. And the CDF said,
accreditation or whatever.
The CDF said absolutely not. Duress implies to individuals, not institutions. So you can't appeal to duress as an institution to justify these things. Proportionalist reasoning. I mentioned proportionalism the other day, the other week. Proportionalism is the idea that there is nothing intrinsically right or wrong, that certain circumstances can justify actions that otherwise you would reject. So it's true abortion is always wrong, but in this case, if this woman is really fearful about her future and wants to finish her college education, that really wouldn't be an abortion. So you're playing with words and playing with concepts. And the church in John Paul's Veritatis Splendor, which is kind of 1993, the foundations of moral theology, rejected, argued against proportionalism. That's not Catholic moral theology. There are certain things which can never lead to true human fulfillment. And the last, to enable the partner to perform these intrinsically evil acts by providing space, personnel, equipment, financing, or governance, or in any way provide essential circumstances. Now that's different than saying your building is over here. The plaza is a fine example of this. You've got Centricare services and hospital services. They share a common heating and air conditioning system. But the hospital is not responsible for the plaza. The hospital is only responsible for those parts of the plaza that they run and occupy. The hospital is not buying the contraceptives that can be given in the Centricare Plaza pharmacy. The hospital is not hiring those staff that do sterilizations. Does that make sense? So you need these.
So Centricare is hiring.
Centricare is not bound by the ERD or Catholic teaching.
Right. So so the hospital is a separate entity.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. It's a separate corporation.
Okay.
They may,
Now, it's getting fuzzier, and
Yes,
fuzzier and
that's-
fuzzier.
they may have the same roof, but it's sectioned out, they may share.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
just
know what
like-
all these buildings are, I mean, I have to remember what the buildings, but yet, even if they share the same roof, there's clear boundaries in those offices.
So in the mall, you might have Victoria's Secret and the Christian
Right,
bookstore.
right.
Mhm.
Not so much secrets, but still.
You know, I mean, they are adjacent perhaps, but they're entirely separate organizations.
So how does that work when financially it all goes up to Centricare as the parent company?
There are what are known as lock boxes. So for certain of these things, hospital money cannot be used for abortion. Oh, Centricare doesn't do abortion, but sterilization, contraception. And so I argued this for a long time, and you know, Centricare just keeps evolving. It was the clinic and the hospital was Centricare, St. Cloud Clinic of Internal Medicine. And the hospital was 95% of the business. Really saved the doctor's practice is what happened with the clinic. And then Centricare started to grow, and Frobenius and Platson, and particularly when Platson became the sole president, that was an intervention from the diocese or the members of the corporation. They started, Platson, and at that time the rationale was, we will entertain invitations to acquire facilities, but we are not going to go look for new hospitals or clinics or something. They come to us, we don't go to them. Under Dr. Holman, it's a different strategy where you seek partners.
He's trying to grow a monopoly.
Well, he wouldn't say.
No,
Provide a
he would not.
continuum.
He's
You want
providing
to,
continuing care.
well, and I mean, so is Sanford, so is Alinas, so is Fairview, so is, you know, Mayo. Everybody wants to dominate their territory.
Yeah.
But in the Centricare territory, you do have, like Staples is still freestanding. You have St. Gabriel's in Little Falls, which is CHI. Breckenridge is CHI. And you just saw, so this all becomes relevant in a sense. You saw maybe last week that Sanford and Fairview want to sign a merger. They tried this in 2013 and the Attorney General said, no, you won't, because of the lack of competition. And so there's going to be a lot more of this happening in the next 10, 15 years of this realignment of facilities. And small independent hospitals and clinics will not be able to survive because of the infrastructure, the overhead, the electronic medical record, the lower reimbursement. So at St. Cloud right now, I think we're at about 62% of this, something like that, is Medicare reimbursement, which is historically significantly lower than private pay or insurance. And so as that balance keeps shifting, then you say, how are we going to keep our bottom line? And right now, with the lack of workforce, you have the facility, the physical plant, but not the people to staff it. And so it cuts into your revenue as well. You can't have the volume that you would normally have. And right now, with a lot of the travel nurses, it's just vastly elevated the cost.
No, just a side thing, and this is kind of new. I just went to the doctor today, and before they even saw me, they wanted me to pay a certain amount.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a new thing. I don't remember this years ago. You had to like,
An estimate.
they gave you, we want $62 before we see. It's just kind of just.
Is it a copay? Not a copay.
Not a copay, it's called an estimate.
Yes. They estimated, that's exactly what it was. I just don't remember that, maybe this is all part of.
Since this is a new thing this year.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be a new patient experience to give you financial
Freedom.
transparency,
Okay.
something like
Something
that.
Alright, so it's supposed to
I
be
did not watch the entire video.
So a lot of this is, it's much like we're not going to raise taxes, we'll just add fees. It's all verbal engineering.
Yes,
Well,
it's
I mean,
Marketing.
out of the transparency, they get you to, they get the money right away.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of,
Yeah, and it gets, so the federal government, there is a law called Knoblach that you cannot refuse emergency treatment to someone. And this is as people lost health coverage and have no primary care provider, they show up in the emergency room for almost anything. And a lot of it you can say, go to the urgent care clinic, or here's what you do at home, and that's why they've gone to a lot of this telemedicine. First you call and see if you really need to come. And, but once they're there, you cannot dump them. You can't say go somewhere else. And it's entitled the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. So if a woman comes in labor or with complications of pregnancy, you also can't.
So it's an emergency.
Emergency Medical and Labor, Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. EMTALA goes back to the mid-90s, I think. Later 90s. It was federal legislation. And then the question becomes, with some of these things, what qualifies as an emergency?
Right, because 70% of what shows up maybe is not an emergency.
Well, yeah, and some of it is not necessarily a medical emergency, but people are in psychological emergency. And this is why you saw this maybe a few weeks ago. Was it Woodbury? And we had a case, in Woodbury, there's several adolescents who have been in the emergency room, housed in the emergency room for weeks and months at a time, because there's nowhere to send them. They're violent.
They're homeless.
Huh?
They're homeless, or?
Well, not homeless, but
They're-
unmanageable.
Oh, yeah.
Violence.
You mentioned that a couple of times ago.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a vast shortage of beds to treat those kind of psychological emergencies.
so it's not appropriate for detention.
And there's just nowhere else to send them. There's 20 beds in the state, and there are always 100 people waiting. So that's where they are. They get no care. There's no reimbursement for it because they don't need to be there for medical reasons. But
But they need.
you can't discharge them because they're in an emergency.
They need a psychiatric emergency.
Yeah.
Well, our
Well,
hospital
and
just,
was it St. Joe's in the cities that closed their psychiatric hospital?
and then what is it, St. John's Prairie in Fargo?
Yeah.
There was talk of,
And so Centricare has seen an increase in volume of psychiatric need because maybe 10 years ago, a lot of these facilities and systems started closing those units. Because it's a continual loss. We just don't do it. You have to go somewhere else. And to its credit, I think, while we struggle, Centricare refused to do that. To say we're not going to get out of that business because people need that care.
well, I mean, you have the VA here in town too.
If you're a veteran.
Yes. But if they can't manage them,
Yeah, then they end up
they
as,
ship them.
right.
Yeah, and this is not something that would work for, detention center for adolescents, or I worked at Booth Brown House in the cities, that's a little different,
Well, and these are people in psychological emergency, and what usually happens is they end up in jail or law enforcement,
That's, yeah.
and that gives them no care that they really need. It just adds to their trauma.
And I
But
don't
then
work-
what do you do when they start to have cognition issues?
Mhm.
And when they're 60 and they've got drug-induced dementia, and do you put them in a memory care where you have other vulnerable adults?
So you can understand why healthcare likes episodic treatments. You break a hip, we'll take care of you. You have a kidney stone, we'll take care of you. You have a baby, we'll take care of you. But these long-term chronic, especially psychological illnesses, they're just intractable.
Do we have a juvenile detention center in the St. Clair area? And that's a little,
No.
a little different.
You've got like Clara's house, you've got some of those,
Those aren't necessarily where people can stay for.
yes.
But
Yeah.
but if they're, they may not have enough openings for some of these people you're talking about.
That is correct. It's residential treatment as opposed to a drop-in center or
Got
a
it.
kind of a.
Got it.
Counties have certain facilities, but they generally, you know, we stabilize you from the emergency and then you're gone. We don't know what happens to you until you come back.
So I worked at a shelter that might take in some of those people, but that was in St. Paul.
Yeah.
Salvation Army.
Not only is there space, but there's no staffing for that either. If you think nursing, regular nursing is understaffed, try psychiatric.
Oh, yeah, we struggle too because we opened the MCAT unit, but they
Mhm.
can't staff the mental health units,
Mhm.
the inpatient mental health. So then those staff have to come in, now those beds can't be staffed either.
So,
And then you get the geriatric psych units where those are staffing issues there too.
correct.
There's no good healthy place to work.
And very often, you know, you've all perhaps are familiar with the ACEs studies,
Oh.
adverse childhood experiences. And you have people that don't just have a medical issue, they don't just have a psychological issue. They're all of these multiple diagnoses.
Right.
It's like the, what do they call it, the psychopathology,
Yeah.
pathophysiology. You know.
So these are some of the pressures on healthcare today, and this is what's driving some of the desire to cooperate, collaborate, find partners who can provide some strength and some depth and some volume and some size.
Yeah.
So right now, Centricare is a revenue of around a little over $2.2 billion annually. And Sanford is about $6.7 billion annually. So it's about 3 times the size, 3 times the personnel. The scale is pretty much the same, you know, in terms of proportion, but it's about 3 times the size.
And what was Centricare?
About 2.1, 2.2 billion revenue. That's just revenue.
Where does Sanford operate from?
They started in South Dakota,
Yeah, yep.
and they now are South Dakota, North Dakota, and into western Minnesota. So that's part of the reason Centricare acquired ACMC in Wilmer, Bryce Memorial Hospital there, to kind of be a buffer, because Sanford's coming this way. They are, where are they at? Like Perham,
Detroit Lakes, Fergus Falls, I'm not sure. That's-
Graceville,
Yep,
I think out west,
yep, Graceville, yeah.
Benson.
Benson was gonna be Centricare now.
Well, I think, yeah, they're trying to,
They're trying Alec.
yeah, that's still a county hospital. Now it's Alamere, but it's still the county.
But Sanford's got a clinic there.
Yeah, but we have our EMR there.
I know.
It's a really odd arrangement, everybody's
It's
sort of
kinda like
angling for that.
Owatonna, when Mayo and Elena.
Yeah.
Elena owned the hospital, Mayo had the clinic.
Mhm.
Getting
So
records there.
Centricare has a partnership with Mayo for the Coburn Cancer Center.
Mhm.
And as telehealth becomes more prominent, and in ways, so that was part of the whole COVID thing, where telehealth really rapidly grew, and trying to lobby Congress, legislature and Congress, to continue funding for telehealth. And I've raised the question, no one can answer this question at meetings, how do we measure quality and outcomes for this? There's no monitoring for it, there's no oversight for it.
Who holds the central database?
Who owns that information? How
Yes.
broadly is it shared? How do you manage HIPAA with those things? Yeah. So there's a lot of unknown questions. But this is what is driving some of the desire for partnerships. So, part 6. I forgot in the house, but I can tell you quite quickly. Part 6 has been here from the 1994 version. Part 6 in edition 4 and 5 said, if So if you look on the third full paragraph where it says when considering collaboration,
Page
in the
23.
introduction,
Mhm.
it says when considering a collaboration. The earlier edition said if considering a collaboration. That single word is a great evolution of recognition that Catholic healthcare will have to cooperate or partner with others in order to survive in many areas, in many markets. So you say if, in other words, the idea was this is something we hope doesn't happen, but if it happens, these are the conditions.
Mm.
Now it says when. It's almost inevitable that this will. So the first two paragraphs there are basically just a general statement. Catholic healthcare and serving the common good has historically worked in collaboration with a variety of non-Catholic partners. That is true. It's always been true. Various factors, however, led to multiplication of collaborative arrangements. Collaborative arrangements can be unique and vitally important opportunities for Catholic healthcare to further its mission of caring for the suffering of the sick in faithful imitation of Christ. It's a way to get into markets that maybe you would not otherwise, to bring a Catholic presence into those areas. And Bishop Kettler often will say in these members' meetings, the hospital, the Catholic hospital, isn't there within Centricare only to have sort of a marginal, carved out presence. It's there to evangelize. It's not only what the system can do for the hospital, it's what the hospital can do for the system and the communities that it serves. Not to make everybody Catholic, but to be a witness to what we believe and do. For example, collaborative arrangements provide opportunities to influence the healing profession through the witness of the gospel. Moreover, they can be opportunities to realign the local delivery system to provide a continuum of health care to the community. So again, if the Catholic entity is the one that does most of the behavioral health work, that's something that is a gift to a community that otherwise maybe would not be there. So it's a witness to the gospel. And it comes at a cost. To provide a model of responsible stewardship of limited healthcare resources. I've always wondered why when they build hospitals it has to be marble and walnut and cherry and all the most expensive stuff. Well, because of philanthropy or government money. To provide poor and vulnerable persons with more equitable access to basic care. The numbers vary, but probably in many markets it's the only safety net. But overall, Catholic healthcare provides over half of the charity care in the country. People who wouldn't have access otherwise. And this has been the history. So I was over at Catherine Drexel the other day, and the students were learning about St. Catherine Drexel. St. Catherine Drexel used the family fortune for the underserved. She was in Minnesota at one point, but particularly the Black and Native American communities that really touched her conscience. And so she wanted to bring the sisters and Catholic faith and Catholic healthcare and Catholic education into those communities.
So what order is that in?
Catherine Drexel. I forget what order she found.
That's fine. You answered my question.
And to provide access to medical technologies and expertise that greatly enhance quality care. Collaboration can, even in some instances, ensure the continued presence of a Catholic institution or the presence of any healthcare facility at all in a given area. So right now, Centricare, of course, went through this whole process, you know, who are we and who do we want to be and blah, blah, blah. But they sort of settled on, we're experts in rural health. Even St. Cloud, so it's the big town, but it's a tiny little place compared to many places in our nation. So to be present in the rural communities, to try and have a medical school that will train family practice docs who will go into these small communities to practice, where your volume will be very low, the incentive is low to be there, and many institutions struggle to have a presence. That's a commitment that will come at a cost. rural health, and there's all kinds of studies about the disparities and inequities and poorer outcomes for rural health.
Well, they're talking now, maternity deserts,
Yeah,
because like, I think it was Springfield down there, closed there.
a couple of years ago there were 60, I think 60 maternity wards, departments that closed in Minnesota, all in rural areas.
Well, Fairmont, people in Fairmont have to go to either Albert Lee or.
To have a baby.
Yeah.
St. Gabe's is still open, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we have 4 of our babies there.
But see, there it would be fairly easy to say, you know, we've got all these other hospitals 10, 15 miles away. But when you're 60 miles away or 80 miles away, much different. So that's what they're referring to here. It is a commitment to be present in communities that otherwise don't have access. When considering a collaboration, so it sounds fine to say we have this idealistic presence, but if you don't have the resources, the staffing, the buildings, the equipment, the medical teams to do it, it's just an idea. So it may mean collaborating, to have a deeper set of pockets that are profitable so that you can subsidize the unprofitable. St. Cloud, what's the, or Centricare, what are the big economic engines? Heart,
Neural cancer.
cancer, neuro.
Neuro.
What are the loss leaders?
Geriatric.
Geriatric, behavioral health. And to some extent, actually, even, it's fascinating to me, so I track this, you saw Directive 53 about basically tubal ligations. And the hospital tracks it. So number of tubals done, the number of pregnant or births, the number of first primary C-section tubals, and the number of secondary. But the bottom line is, over the last maybe 20 years, St. Cloud Hospital delivers anywhere from 25 to 2,700 babies every year. That number hasn't changed more than a few percent up or down.
That's a lot of Brahms lullabies.
Yeah, but you think that as the population grows, the number of births would grow. But it's really stayed very stable. There's a lot of factors. This is fascinating.
Do you have any theories?
Well, part of it is, you know, so the area population has grown, but so family size and the number of people having babies has grown.
People having less babies even though there's more people.
Right.
Yes, families are smaller.
And you have, you know, the gradual movement, demographic movement towards the cities. Maple Grove, as a hospital, is a very popular destination for babies. And it's only 30 miles. If you're on this side of, that side of St. Cloud or commute, it's just the obvious place. So when seeking collaboration, this remains true. Catholic healthcare administrators should seek first to establish arrangements with Catholic institutions or other institutions that operate in conformity with the Church's moral teaching. So ideally, you have 2 Catholic hospitals nearby, or maybe a Catholic hospital, a Catholic nursing home, and they're both struggling. Let's collaborate and make an arrangement. So an example is St. Cloud Hospital and St. Gabriel's. St. Cloud Hospital is St. Cloud Hospital, its own corporation. The diocese does not own the hospital, has no financial interest in the hospital, does not govern the hospital. It simply provides Catholic identity through the members of the corporation. St. Gabriel's belongs to who?
Catholic Congress.
CHI. And there was an attempt by Essentia about 2 years ago. There was talks that Essentia was going to acquire St. Gabriel's and Breckenridge and I think 3 or 4 other hospitals in the upper Midwest. And that deal fell through. So suddenly St. Gabriel's became available again. But CHI does not want to divest St. Gabriel's. They want to divest this whole package in this region. So it might sound nice, let's just get the Catholic groups together, but there are complications there as well. It is not uncommon, however, that arrangements with Catholic institutions are not practical, like this one, and that in pursuit of the common good, the only available candidates for collaboration are institutions that do not operate in conformity with the Church's moral teaching. Go back for a moment to that second clause, or other institutions that operate in conformity with the Church's moral teaching. So there are other faith-based organizations, maybe a Jewish hospital, maybe a Lutheran hospital, maybe a Presbyterian hospital, that don't share all of our commitments, but certainly are closer than a purely secular institution. So you kind of work your way down that. So how do we make this work? Such collaborative arrangements can pose particular challenges if they would involve institutional connections with activities that conflict with the natural moral law, church teaching, or canon law. So we talked about immoral actions. Okay, the Catholic moral tradition, I'm in that middle paragraph that that Catholic moral tradition provides. So the principles governing cooperation, and that's on the other side of your sheet, this flowchart. You can do it also in narrative. In the 4th edition, there was a narrative about the principles of cooperation that caused problems because it was not the normal wording of the Catholic tradition. It was written by a priest from St. Louis who argued for years that he was right and the rest were wrong. But he used some unusual, innovative language in trying to describe these. And it led to confusion, and it led to arrangements being made that clearly did not fit the Catholic limits of what cooperation can be. So then you read in the 5th edition, they took it out and said the previous edition of these directives had an appendix on cooperation that led to complications, so we took it out, basically. And if there are questions, you should consult reliable theological experts. It doesn't say who those were or what. So the National Catholic Bioethics Center and Catholic Health Association are kind of the two leading voices that would be considered these reliable theological experts about cooperation. Particularly the NCBC has the sort of vocal support of Rome as being a reliable moral guide. CHA not always, but certainly the NCBC.
Stands for what again?
National Catholic Bioethics Center.
Okay.
They're in Massachusetts, I believe. John Haas, I think, is still their director. And you can go online, they have a website, ncbcenter.org. And they have a lot of really excellent materials and commentary and position papers on things, including some of the transgender issues and things like that. But when I want to test my understandings of this, I usually look there and say, am I really kind of in line with? They're not extreme conservative, but they're faithful to the magisterium. They don't sort of, well, that's what they say, but this is what they mean, interpretation. So the NCBC is a good guide. So they took that out, and then the 6th edition here, you see, put it back in again, but a different language. So these 2 long paragraphs, actually 3, is a narrative about the principles governing cooperation. Rather than reading that, I turn you back to the flow chart. So the question is, P is the principal, and C is the cooperator, the principal actor and the cooperator. So the principal actor is the one who's doing the thing, providing care, has the clinic. Is their action ethically good? If it is, that's good. We'd be happy to cooperate with you. We'd be happy to partner with you because you're doing good things. Is P's action ethically good? No. We are doing sterilizations in our building. Is the cooperator's action ethically good? Well, if the answer is no, if you didn't do those sterilizations, we would. You say, well then, the cooperator is not really a cooperator. They're a wrongdoer in their own right. They're an accomplice to the wrongdoing. Is C's action ethically good? So we will, if there are complications from your surgical sterilization, we will take care of you. If there are complications from your abortion that we did not provide, we will take care of you. That's a good action, to care for someone in need, no matter how they got themselves in this situation. Okay? So their actions are the good. Does the cooperating party, say the Catholic hospital, concur with the Lutherans' intention to do wrong? If we concur with it, then that's formal cooperation. We share the intention. What you have chosen to do that is morally wrong, we agree with. And that is never justified. However, if I don't agree with your wrongdoing, then it becomes material cooperation. So I'm somehow a part of your action, follow up after this abortion, but I don't agree with abortion, we're not funding the abortion, we're not referring people to your clinic for an abortion, we're not advertising for your abortion, we're not subsidizing abortion services, we don't provide an ambulance ride to there, all those kinds of things. So material cooperation means I'm somehow involved, but against my will. Go back to the clerk in the 7-Eleven. I open that safe. I'm immediately involved in the wrongdoing. The thief could not have taken that money unless I acted. I'm immediately, directly involved. But it's against my will. So it doesn't make the action right. The theft is still a theft. But as the cooperator, my moral responsibility is minimal or absent. I was forced to act against my will. A lack of voluntariness means I am not morally responsible. Now, that's different to say, look, I hope you're out safe, you give me half of it. Then I'm cooperating intentionally, and I share the wrongdoing. That would be formal cooperation. So, immediate material cooperation is what I just described. I'm involved directly, but I don't have the same motivation. I'm doing it out of fear, or out of habit, or out of force, or out of some other unrelated reason. Okay, so I'm not doing it immediately, then I'm immediate material cooperator. I'm somehow involved. I deliver the mail to the abortion clinic. I pay my light bill, and it's the same electrical company that keeps the lights on in that clinic. And this was the question, a number of years ago, and come up again in Minnesota. I pay my taxes. Tax dollars go to fund abortion through Doe versus Gomez. And I did a study at one point. If the average taxpayer in Minnesota, if he wanted to, or she wanted to protest abortion, would have to withhold 1 cent of their taxes. Given the volume of abortions and the volume of the income and how much goes to subsidize these things. So it's not to say that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't have that sort of decisive moral weight that's going to get people's attention. They would say, well, who cares about a penny? You people are just way out of line. So, immediate material cooperation may be justified more or less based on the objective reason for cooperating. Isn't that I'm afraid that people won't like me? Or, so I'll give you an example, and I was in my office, I had this conversation with a pharmacist who works for, I won't tell you where, but not the hospital. and often is the only pharmacist on call. And one of the benefits for employees is contraception. And so she was asked at times to fill these prescriptions, which is to her morally objectionable. And so you go through the thing, can I find some arrangement where somebody else will do that? You got to go to this pharmacist, they will do it, I will not. Can my supervisor not make sure that I'm not the only pharmacist in that pharmacy at certain hours when this frequently happens? Work, you know, everybody gets off work and they got their shift. It became not possible in every circumstance. And so in that case, what is the serious reason? I would lose my employment. I'm the breadwinner for our family. Should I have to sacrifice my career and my job for this very rare occasion when I might be put in this position? So that, I believe, in the moral tradition would justify, that would be a serious reason for cooperating in this immediate material way. It's not that the person couldn't get that prescription somewhere else, or they might have to wait, but the pressure of employer and threats and sanctions and fines and things like that became a factor in this case. And then, is C's action causally proximate or remote? In other words, how close am I to actually making this happen? If I'm the janitor and I empty the garbage and sweep the floor where they do, the pharmacy where they give out contraception, I'm very remote from this. I have no idea what they all do during the day. I've just got a nice and clean. That's very different than, well, I put those pills in. So, every commentary you read on the principles of cooperation will say these are among the most complex principles of Catholic moral theology, and difficult to apply.
It's so interesting. I mean, just
So it's easy to put on paper, but in a practical case, say, where does that fit? Now, I gave you this because it's slightly different than this one. So what this one says, the Catholic moral tradition provides principles for accessing cooperation with the wrongdoing of others. Distinguishing between formal and material cooperation. Okay, so that distinction is still there. Formal cooperation occurs when an action, either by its very nature or by the form it takes in a concrete situation, can be defined as a direct participation in an immoral act. I do the abortion. I cut the tube. I'm the nurse that is there that hands the instruments for this procedure.
Nurse that preps this patient for the procedure.
Well, and prep is a little bit different than being directly involved in the actual, related, certainly closer than the janitor.
Yeah.
But I'm maybe not in the room when the action occurs. Or I maybe do post-op. Yeah. Or sharing the immoral intention of the person committing it. So that's consistent with what I put on paper. Therefore, cooperation is formal not only when the cooperator shares the intention of the wrongdoer, but also when the cooperator directly participates in the immoral act, even if the cooperator does not share the intention of the wrongdoer, but participates as a means to some other end. Now, I bring this up to say, what is left out in this version is the idea of immediate material cooperation. So they call it formal, and that is a difference from the tradition as well. They don't mention immediate material cooperation in this version of. So if you go to the next paragraph, the cooperation is material if the one cooperating neither shares the wrongdoer's intention, that I would agree with, nor cooperates by directly participating in the act as a means to some other end, but rather contributes to the immoral activity in a way that's causally related but not essential. So they do refer to immediate material cooperation, but they do not use the category of immediate material cooperation, which has always been in the tradition. So the earlier appendix is problematic. I think this appendix is problematic, and naturally I believe that I'm right. Okay. Everybody holds their own opinion because they're sure they're right.
Right.
But again, this is the older tradition. Yes, Joe?
So the current one doesn't have, obviously, the immediate.
The immediate material cooperation. They call that formal cooperation.
They call the immediate formal.
Correct.
And they don't have,
They don't have this
They call
box.
it
right, they don't have this box. Do they have immediate?
Yes. And that's the only form of material cooperation they cite here, is the immediate
And they have
material
immediate, they
cooperation.
say immediate in here.
Yeah.
I would agree with you, though, this is more concise
I
by
tend to think so.
having this.
But again, I didn't invent that. I got that out of the moral manuals.
Right?
Because people learn well with algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can't fit everything into the box, and they still can't figure it out. Like,
Yes.
nothing all fits in here.
We had an ethics committee meeting today with Benedictine Health System, their clinical ethics committee, and they had, it's really a very fine document, kind of a framework for long-term care ethical decision making. All the things that, the issues that come up and the kind of principles you would consider. And it goes on for about 20 pages, it's too long. And then they have a flow chart at the end. It's like a plate of spaghetti. Yeah. It's way too complicated to ever be used. So I tried to make this a little interesting. Now, go on just a little bit. So the other piece of cooperation is scandal. And any moral analysis of collaborative arrangement must also take into account the danger of scandal, which is an attitude or behavior which leads another to do evil. I'll come back to that. The cooperation of a Catholic institution with other healthcare entities engaged in moral activities, even when it is morally justified in all other respects, might in certain cases lead people to conclude that these activities are morally acceptable. And that could lead people to sin. The danger of scandal, therefore, needs to be carefully evaluated in each case, and that belongs to the bishop to determine that. In some cases, the danger of scandal can be mitigated by certain measures, such as providing an explanation as to why the Catholic institution is cooperating this way at this time. So you say, we're completely understanding of the optics, as the saying goes, but here's what's really underneath this apparent arrangement. And these are the firewalls that are in place, and this is why we think that because there is no alternative to serve the common good of this community other than this arrangement. In any event, prudential judgments that take into account particular circumstances need to be made about the risk and danger of scandal, whether they can be effectively addressed. So we have this conversation around the sale of St. Benedict's senior community. How do you explain to the community what is happening and why, in such a way that they don't think the Catholic Church is walking away from senior health care? So that is a work. We're still in the process of looking and interviewing potential buyers. Decision has not been made. Once that's made, then you've got to work with the buyer and with the diocese and with Centricare to craft that message in as clear a way as it can be. We'll see what happens.
That was a surprising announcement.
It perhaps was. Certainly locally, Centricare has been looking at, as many institutions have, this idea of the continuum of care. We tried to be everything to everybody, and we don't have the expertise to do all of that. And so they are doing an analysis in Centricare of all of their senior services, not just the local one. And so there's concerns about finance. COVID really hit occupancy and staffing much further. So we don't have the expertise or the business model to understand that's a very different financial space than acute care. So you look for partners that do this as their living success in providing that niche of the healthcare. So, and the bishop is very clear, and Sister Susan from the Benedictine Sisters, we want the best partner for the good of the residents, of course the sisters also from St. Scholastica. This is part of the non-negotiable as well, that the existing arrangement for providing care for them would also be part of this arrangement, whatever it comes out to. But that it's more important that we have a Catholic partner to provide this care than that Centricare does. But the quality, the spiritual care, and the long-term sustainability of it become the primary criteria, as opposed to the stubborn things that we built this, we're gonna run it into the ground ourselves.
So they're out there. There are Catholic entities,
Yes.
healthcare,
Yes.
organized entities that
focus on long-term care.
Correct.
Okay.
And these are Catholic and faith-based partners, as opposed to some of the for-profit places around the country, the Sanctuary, and what's the one out by, right across from Crossroads, they built that huge place.
Tullamore, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people moving into that market, and it's a business model that says the population is aging, they're gonna need someplace. Here's a niche, low-hanging fruit.
But staffing is.
Yeah, private investors, equity.
But staffing is still the big issue.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the concern as you know, and this happens everywhere. This again is this whole rural health thing, that there are no services out in the rural areas. You're not gonna build a large nursing home in West Union and hope that people are gonna show up there, you know. So they tend to move toward where more services are in larger communities.
So then
But
that's
you
why-
saturate the market.
But so in these small towns, that's why you see these little, how should I say, assisted living,
Mm-hmm.
mom pop,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mhm.
they buy duplex homes and then they
Yeah.
convert them to whatever.
Yeah. And was it last year or the year before the Minnesota legislature started clamping down on some of these things? They promise services that they have no resources to deliver,
Right.
and outcomes are poor, and there's nobody to sue. We're bankrupt. And you're left with no recourse.
Who owns the one in Upsala? There's like an assisted living.
I do not know. What's it called?
I don't know, I know the one, I had a student that I taught, when she got her LPN license, they opened one in New Munich,
Okay. Who opened it?
her and her family,
Oh, so it's a private.
private.
Yeah.
But it's like an assisted living, very small.
So the legislators started to clamp down on some of these things where they say, we provide dementia care. Well, no, you don't. You just lock on the door, and that's our dementia care. They'd have no medical expertise, no geriatrician, no,
Life enrichment,
yeah,
you know.
no spiritual care, no activities. It's just, so you can advertise anything, and people then are stuck. You sign a contract, you either walk away and lose big money, or it was just a kind of a wild, wild west scenario. So they're trying to rein some of this in. But that requires inspections and inspectors and more bureaucracy
Sure.
to enforce. And you just, well, inspectors are going to come to our little place, you know.
Does Little Falls have an assisted living type?
Yes, that is St. Francis Health Services out of Morris. They started as a nursing home as a part of Assumption in Morris. And it's now in, I think they're in Wisconsin a little bit as well. They have 14 or 15 long-term care facilities. They also have about 40 to 50 group homes, 2 to 4 bed group homes that they run. So they are a Catholic entity, and they have the annual meeting at the Chancery. I sit in all those meetings. So there's that. St. Cloud Hospital meets quarterly, their members. Assumption in Cold Spring, MOM, or Mother of Mercy in Albany, St. William's in Parker's Prairie. Those are the Catholic entities. And of course, some of them have, more than one site, but those are the systems
Okay,
in the Diocese of St. Cloud.
good to know.
So I bring up the scandal thing here because this is my one near brush with fame. When these were being revised, Bishop Kinney shared with me the drafts for comment. And I said, you should tell them that they should define what scandal is. Because many people, when they hear scandal, they think, I don't like that, that's scandalous. And that's not what scandal means in the moral tradition. It means you mislead people about Catholic teaching. If the Catholic Church does it, then it looks like the Church agrees with it. So that's what we mean by scandal, not that people just are
So you're
shocked by that.
mislead, but
It misleads people about what authentic Catholic teaching is. So if a Catholic hospital provides abortion, well, the Catholic Church must approve of abortion because they do it in the Catholic hospital, or contraception or sterilization.
so the church needs to close it, goes to, never mind, so never mind.
No, it's,
Thank
that
you.
scandals,
That
and you mentioned
makes
before
sense.
too, scandals is it's another different understanding. It misrepresents what the church teaches.
Well, and we saw this, during the COVID era, people were scandalized that the church would be in favor of vaccines or masks. That's not contrary to Catholic teaching, it's just you don't like it because you read too much of the internet. That's not scandal. It would be scandal if we say, the people that don't get vaccinated can just die, we don't care. That would be scandal.
People's perceptions is not what you mean by scandal.
Correct.
Scandal is what the church is actually doing.
So, for whatever reason, they accepted that, and now there's this footnote to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. That's my near brush with fame.
Well, you got the fame.
I maybe wasn't the only one that brought that up.
Okay.
I liked it.
We've had a part.
I think. Okay. In sum, collaborative arrangements with entities that do not share a Catholic moral tradition present both opportunities and challenges. Yes, pros and cons. The opportunities to further the mission of Catholic healthcare can be significant. The challenges do not necessarily preclude all such arrangements on moral grounds, but they do make it imperative for Catholic leaders to undertake careful analyses to ensure that new collaborative arrangements, as well as those that already exist, abide by the principles governing cooperation, effectively address the risk of scandal, abide by canon law, and sustain the Church's witness to Christ and his saving message. Okay? Now, as I mentioned before, the directives here, you have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of them. Before there were 5. So this is greatly expanded and to address some emerging realities. First, each diocesan bishop has the ultimate responsibility to assess whether collaborative arrangements involving Catholic health providers operating in his local church involve wrongdoing, wrongful cooperation, give scandal, or undermine the church's witness. So it's for the bishop to decide on all those Catholic entities operating in his diocese whether it meets the muster. I can advise him, other people can advise him, but it's ultimately his call. And I can guarantee you that Bishop Kinney and Bishop Kettler did not always agree with my analysis. But that's fine. It's their responsibility. 68, where there's a possibility that a prospective collaborative arrangement lead to serious adverse consequences for identity or reputation, or entail the risk of scandal, the diocesan bishop is to be consulted in a timely manner. So, for instance, with this St. Benedict Center thing, to their credit, the hospital did their own analysis in terms of, can we turn this around? Can we improve with what the resources that we have? Or should we look for a partner? As soon as they came to the conclusion that we're not sure that we are the best operators of this, they approached the bishop and they approached Sister Susan and the Benedictine sisters and said, here's what we're thinking, not here's what we've decided. Here's what we're thinking, tell us what you think. Do you have objections to this? And that's when the research starts. Well, it's too early to say. We're not opposed to exploring this, but don't make any decisions or promises. So this, for a year or so, looking at this. In addition, the diocesan bishop's approval is required for collaborative arrangements involving institutions subject to his governing authority, such as St. Cloud Hospital. When they involve institutions not subject to his governing authority but operating in his diocese, such as those involving a juridic person erected by the Holy See, the diocesan bishops need allowed status to be obtained. So for instance, now the Benedictines don't own the hospital either, even though they built it and founded it. In 1964, the St. Cloud Hospital Corporation was created, separate from the Benedictines, separate from the diocese. And it was done in such a way, I think it was $1. They basically sold it or gave it to the community. And then you had a group of trustees, a board of directors essentially. And the members of the corporation, which was the bishop, vicar general, and the priors and sub-priors of the Benedictines, still had overall authority to appoint the board. They did not operate the hospital. They did not have any financial arrangement with the hospital, but they oversaw the Catholic identity of the hospital. That worked fine. 1994, Centricare is formed. And it's an entirely different arrangement. Now it's a secular corporation that has as one of its partners a Catholic institution.
Which is St. Cloud Hospital.
Which is St. Cloud Hospital. St. Benedict's Senior Committee has always been a wholly owned subsidiary of the hospital. It was never separately incorporated. It's a hospital operation.
So St. Benedict's Center was a part of St. Cloud Hospital?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there was...
Organizationally,
Yep.
on the org chart, yeah.
And it still is.
It still is,
Yep.
as of today, correct. But if, and this is more common in many places, the juridic person erected by the Holy See means mostly the religious orders. So if the Benedictines had still owned the hospital, then the bishop would have to be consulted. He would not sell the hospital or St. Benedict's Center, but he would have to be consulted because it harms the stable patrimony of the church. Okay. So in this case, if St. Benedict's Center is sold, the Benedictines don't own it, the diocese doesn't own it, so there's no financial arrangement, there's no permission needed from Rome to say, you can't sell this church property. It's not church property anymore. That took place in 1964. In cases involving health reception and extended crowd, this is the new thing, one of the new things. So, like St. Francis Health Services, CHI, Ascension Health, they're Catholic networks that cross multiple diocesan boundaries. Which bishop is in charge? You got all these bishops.
Whoever is the largest diocese.
It's the bishop where the headquarters are.
Can you mention that?
The corporate headquarters. The other bishops should be consulted regularly and have responsibility. So you may not know this, but your system's hospital in my diocese is doing sterilizations. You need to do something about that, corporate. So he would be in contact with the main office bishop. So you have to address this. And then the bishops involved in this collaboration should make every effort to reach a consensus. Good luck. Remember when we were at some meeting down in the cities, Bishop Kinney was there, and this was a sort of an educational seminar, and one of the participants said to Bishop Kinney, Well, the bishop should just decide. He said, look, we can't even decide whether Christmas is a holy day or not. That was the year it fell on Sunday, and should it be an obligation or not? So you have to go. Some churches were not holding Christmas services because it was on Sunday. People should have a family day. Not the Catholic churches, but some of them. Catholic health organizations are not permitted to engage, here it is, see this is contrary to its own introduction, immediate material cooperation in actions that are intrinsically immoral, such as abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, or direct sterilization. I don't know why nobody caught that. The directive still uses that term, but the introduction is
Show
not.
me exactly where you are in
Number 70.
there. Right?
There it refers to that category of immediate.
It does use the word immediate. I was trying to find,
Yeah.
and then there's no, so it does read into this, but like you said, this whole piece here is left out. This piece here is left out.
This piece is in the introduction.
Uses the word.
This piece is not.
Okay.
Just that box. But it's
They
in the
call it-
directive.
Right.
Do they use the exact word immediate?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm
In the
sorry.
introduction.
I'm
Yes.
sorry.
That's right. So these are the things that we cannot do under any circumstance. Be involved directly in the Catholic hospital or organization. Abortions, euthanasia, assisted suicide, direct sterilization. Now, you know this, I've said this before, Centricare from its foundation prohibited abortion or euthanasia in any of its facilities, Catholic and non-Catholic. And that has stayed intact. And now as we're looking at governance again, this is one of my beating the drum, that has to stay in the documents. And I have no reason to believe it won't stay in the documents. It was easy to promise no euthanasia at the time because it was illegal everywhere. Now as it becomes increasingly, what is it, about 20 states allow euthanasia? It's like 40% of the United States.
Thanks to Kevorkian.
Well, and others, Timothy Quill, and,
Yeah, West
but it's a
Coast.
growing movement, and there's every legislative session that isn't all about biennium financial allocation. This comes up, and it will continue to come up. And abortion now, and I raised this with our group as well, as Minnesota becomes sort of that haven state, the pressures will grow. Everybody to provide this, including the Catholic organization. So we'll see where that goes. When considering opportunities for collaborative arrangements that entail material cooperation, there's that term, in wrongdoing, Catholic institutional leaders must assess whether scandal, again, might be given, whether the church's witness might be undermined. And again, this is from the introduction, which borrowed older language, that if you can explain in a coherent, rational, justified way why you're doing this, why you're involved in a partnership with others who are doing this, why you can have occupancy in a plaza next, a few doors down from places where they do this, but that's not our
Right.
department,
That's immediate.
then it's can be done. The Catholic Party in a collaborative arrangement, 72. So the Catholic Party has a responsibility to assess periodically, doesn't say how often periodically means, whether the binding agreement is being observed and implemented in a way that is consistent with the natural moral law, Catholic teaching, and canon law. So does that mean annually? Does it mean quarterly? Does it mean every 6 months? Doesn't say. It just says it has to be done periodically. And of course, 50 years is a period of time too, but that's not what is envisioned. And it's the Catholic Party's responsibility to do that. You can't expect the secular party to say, we think we're crossing your lines.
It's accountability. Oh,
Correct. Now, go back to Centricare for a moment. My argument as the governance conversations have gone on is, and this too goes back to the very foundation of Centricare, that in the Articles of Incorporation, Centricare guarantees the resources necessary for the St. Cloud Hospital to continue to operate as a Catholic hospital. that is now part of their fiduciary responsibility. And so I've been beating this drum for years. The members of the corporation have this opportunity to do orientation for the Centricare board. And we were able to actually include that in the last governance documents in the bylaws, that the members can provide orientation. If this is part of your responsibility, to provide Catholic identity, you need to know what it is. Here's what we mean, not what you find on the internet. This is what the bishop means. And that's part of their fiduciary responsibility.
So that has to be included in their mission statement, philosophy statement.
Mm-hmm. It's in their articles of incorporation. And it's one of the provisions that Centricare cannot change on its own. It requires the members of the corporation to approve of that amendment if it should. So there are firewalls there too.
So the St. Cloud Hospital isn't solely in charge of hiring. Centricare does the hiring? for
That
St.
is
Cloud?
correct.
Yes.
But
And some of this was done by arrangement, and some of it's just been creeping.
Well, and then I feel like I got creeped out because I was hired by St. Cloud Hospital. I changed positions, and now, after I changed positions, now I work for Centricare, not St. Cloud Hospital.
St. Cloud Hospital has, do they have any employees? Well, their office,
Oh,
I think everybody is Centricare.
Has it, that's what I was gonna ask, isn't everybody?
Right, but
I think everybody is Centricare.
Are they really though? Because like when I went from ortho neuro to the football, I still worked for St. Cloud Hospital.
Yeah, so, no, it's a
But
good.
now I work for Centricare because now I have a different, I don't know, whatever it is on your pay stub. Now I report to Centricare, not St. Cloud
Mhm.
Hospital.
I should correct that. Thank you for saying that. So everybody is paid through Centricare. It's one payroll system. But whether I work for Centricare or the hospital, I think still
Right.
does differ.
There are still St. Cloud employees,
Yes,
St. Cloud Hospital employees, and there are Centricare employees.
but they're all paid through the same payroll.
Centricare pays them, yeah, but you don't get any control over that, you.
Right. And benefits therefore have to be uniform.
Mhm.
If the same employer, you can't have different sets of benefits for different
You
employees.
still have to have the same 403B and
so what was the incentive for Centricare to want to, support, the Catholic identity? Is something that they chose on their own, or just to be good, to be?
It goes back to the beginning
To
when
be good
this,
partners, or?
the St. Cloud Hospital was 95% of the business
When it
and
started.
was able to call the shots.
Okay,
Look,
so-
we will collaborate with this secular clinic under these conditions.
Got it.
And still, they're over half, 60% of the business and 75% of the employment at St. Cloud Hospital. You have 400, I think you're licensed 493 beds,
Something like that.
and the next largest hospital is, maybe 40? Monticello is 25 beds, they're all, this is all the rest are critical access, I think, except Wilmer.
Yeah, Wilmer, whatever it used to be, Redwood Falls is critical access.
So then it's a matter of, if that agreement was made that, Centricare, part of you is is to collaborate and support us, then like you said, the next step is just making sure that the language of their education becomes real.
Yes.
Their board.
And part of the history of Centricare as well, in the 90s, was I think it was a mandate, but it was guidance from the Minnesota legislature that every hospital, and there was some financial incentive with Medicare money aligned with this, has to be part of a integrated delivery system. That was the buzzword at the time. You provide this continuum of care. No freestanding hospitals, you have to care for the whole community. And so there was incentive then, regulatory and financial, to be part of a larger organization. Okay. Before affiliating, Catholic institution must ensure that, again, neither its administrators nor its employees will manage, carry out, assist in carrying out, make its facilities available for, make referrals for, or benefit from the revenue generated by our moral procedures. This list comes from this CDF material. And in 2013, I think, there was an article, I should have brought that was published. It came from the CDF. It was published in the National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly, listing these 15 conditions about collaboration. And much of where this chapter came from comes from that document. That was the incentive for changing Part 6.
And that's for 73, correct? Directive 73?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
And 74. Anything that comes under the control of the Catholic institution, whether by acquisition, governance, or management, must be operated in full accordance with the moral teaching of the Catholic Church. So if I'm effectively in charge of it, I oversee it, you report to me as a Catholic that it has to be done according to Catholic moral teaching. It is not permitted, this is again from those 3 cases, to establish another entity that would oversee, manage, or perform immoral procedures. So I can't draw up the civil bylaws, policies, procedures, I can't pay for it, I can't establish finance, I can't borrow money to lend to the other corporation to do it. I can't legally incorporate it, I have to be arm's length. That's not my thing. I have no legal involvement, I have no legal responsibility. If they get sued, it's not me. Representatives of Catholic healthcare institutions who serve as members of governing boards of non-Catholic health organizations, I suppose that's kind of me in a sense, I'm on the Centrica board, that do not adhere to the ethical principles, should make their opposition known to immoral procedures and not give their consent to any decisions proximately connected with such procedures. Great care must be exercised to avoid getting scandal or adversely affecting the witness of the church. So I say things that make people just choose, and then they go on like nothing happened. And that was part of the bishop's idea. He served on the Central Board for 3 years. And then between him and Sister Susan, it says, the bylaws say bishop or prioress or a delegate. And they both agreed on me because they both knew they were, or presumed that they would soon be out of office. And I was a known quantity then. So you just do it.
You'll be around for a while.
Probably so. But really, Bishop at that time thought, I'm going to be gone in 6 months.
Sure.
Why should I sit, we'll have to appoint somebody. And Sister Susan, she's coming to the end of her term, I think in June?
Could be.
Yeah, as priors.
June.
I think June 11th, July 11th. It's the Feast of St. Benedict, I think. An example of this is the current bylaws of Centricare say that the St. Cloud Hospital Board chairperson is an ex officio member of the Centricare Board. So that person too, right now it's Renee Frowndienst, Bob Thuringer from this parish was the past chair. They sit on that board, but they cannot vote for things that are contrary to Catholic teaching. We are a minority, so it's not going to change the vote, but we'll never be in the majority either if there is a vote contrary to Catholic teaching. And finally, if it is discovered, that a Catholic institution might be wrongly cooperating, then you got to tell the bishop, and then you address it as soon as reasonably possible. Which means you want to be careful about how you craft it, you provide an alternative, that you make sure the community still has the access to the service it needs. You can't do that with God and leave everything just kind of fall.
So clearly this has happened, otherwise it would not be written.
That is correct. One of the classic cases, and this happened in, so I give great credit to Centricare and St. Cloud Hospital members, because we meet well, I shouldn't say we, I sit in those meetings for 20-some years, but they meet quarterly. In Phoenix, you might remember this case, Bishop Olmsted and St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix. There was a case of I think it was, what do you call it, when a woman has high blood pressure in pregnancy?
Preeclampsia.
Eclampsia.
Yeah, and she was, I think, 11 weeks pregnant and was serious. The question is, you know, was it life-threatening? But at any rate, their hospital ethics chair approved the termination of that pregnancy. And the bishop, Bishop Olmsted, found out and removed Catholic identity from the hospital. This almost never happens. I think that was the first time it ever happened in history that he said, you are no longer a Catholic hospital because of this decision. It was bad news all the way around. But if you go a little backstory there, the diocese had been trying to work with that hospital. It was a religious order hospital for years and was always rebuffed. We don't need you, we have our own governance, you know, this is our deal. The bishop would just kind of mind his own business, basically. And so there was a lot of tension even before Bishop Olmsted was there. And so this was kind of the final straw. This, I honestly believe, would not happen in this setting because there's this regular line of communication and it's sitting through a lot of meetings, but it keeps everybody sort of mutually communicating in the sense that I better be accountable because they're asking these questions and they're on the board and they will know these things.
You would also think that, I don't know, the bishop would do whatever he could to maintain the Catholic identity because of the opportunity it is to influence and evangelize and to...
And he didn't close the hospital, he just said it's no longer a Catholic hospital.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm following you in terms of some of the politics and feeling part of it, maybe feeling kind of ignored earlier, but
well, sorry, Joe, let me just interrupt. I left out a piece of this. So it wasn't just action, reaction. It was, here's what we need to do to handle this.
Oh, I didn't.
And it was continually rebuffed.
Okay.
We
All right,
don't
well,
need your
by
input,
the
we don't
order.
need your
All right.
approval, we don't, yes, you do.
Or
Yeah.
by an order that ran that house.
Yeah, I don't remember the order.
I was going to say, do you think there's any intentionality in their decision to spur that reaction?
Yeah,
Well, and so if you
Because
look
they
at this
wanted
to.
local community, there are people who would not be sad if the Catholic hospital was not a Catholic hospital. They view it as an obstacle rather than a positive contribution.
This was down in, where was this?
Phoenix.
Phoenix, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it almost happened, maybe it did happen in that kind of respect. I think it was Los Angeles. There was another similar case with a Catholic hospital and running into a conflict with the bishop that just could not be resolved.
Got it.
So the final straw is, we've given you every opportunity to meet these criteria, but as the bishop, it's my responsibility to say whether it is or isn't, and as long as you persist in this direction, it isn't.
That makes sense. So yeah, so this last piece, I mean, even if something hadn't happened at that point, you can see that the potential could be there.
Yeah.
And at some point, well, that's, yeah.
And so some of this, so that was a case about a particular set of circumstances and an issue that finally drove it. But some of this, and this is where this revised statement of the principles of cooperation, people in good faith followed certain kinds of guidance that they thought was reliable Catholic guidance. And then later a bishop says, that's not what we mean. You can't do that. That's got to change. We'll give you a year to sunset. We'll give you 2 years to figure this out, whatever it might be, if it's not, gravely, immediately harmful or dangerous. And either they do it. If they refuse to do it, that's when you say.
Right. I'm with you.
So if St. Cloud Hospital, as things evolve and pressure in the community evolves in the country, and say, we believe that we're the only place outside of Minneapolis that abortion can be done, and we can do it safely, and we can provide aftercare, and we'll do counseling to try and discourage people from it, but they're gonna have, they'll do it themselves, or they go to some dangerous clinic, so we will compromise and do it. Then the bishop would have his, be presented with this. We cannot call you a Catholic hospital. And you can't start your own clinic that says, well, it's not our, now if Centricare says we're gonna do that, then you say, well, your articles say you will not. And that shouldn't have to be the bishop that would say it. That should be the CEO and the board that says, according to our documents.
Or that article probably flowed, like you said, out of that relationship that was initially developed, and saying, okay, we'll do this with you, but we want some influence.
So that goes back to 1964, correct?
Well, it's 94, when
94.
Centricare was formed.
It's when the two came together, yeah,
Yeah.
as I understand it.
Yeah, and so there was an attorney, an outside counsel who looked at some of those documents since, well, the hospital was built in 28. The Benedictines started the hospital in when was it? 1889, something like that, I don't remember exactly.
There's like 86.
86, well, that was when the tornado went through, yeah. And it existed a little bit before that. But just since the creation of St. Cloud Hospital as a corporation in 1964, I think there were like 22 different sets of bylaws and 3 or 4 sets of articles of incorporation. They would restate the articles with little changes. You know. So he spent several months and his team looking through all of those changes. What really changed, you know? There's no redlining or underscoring about what happened. So it takes a long time to sort of figure out what word in these 35 pages changed, and what does it mean, and how did it happen?
And then looking at the consistency of the voice, the dialogue, and the map.
There's nobody left.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so at Centricare, when we did the last governance round, John Frobenius and I were the only people that were there from the beginning. Everybody else was new. Board, executives, administrators, bishop, vicar general, you know, they're all new.
And this was back when?
Well, that was in 2015 and 16. We looked at the governance things. So anyway, that's part 6.
What was the reason for going through and trying to figure out what words have changed through all this?
The question is, as the next wave of governance is under conversation, what is the evolution of these conversations?
To just help people understand what these are.
Yeah, so I really do go to all these meetings. When I say I've got a meeting, I really do show
I
up. and stuff.
never questioned it, but that gives people a history and some direction.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's always fun to be a consultant because I have no responsibility. Here's what I think you should think about, and not my decision.